Today is the first time in about a week, maybe 8 days, that I have been fully clothed. I've really been wearing out the bathrobes lately, but since I am getting this video to you guys, I figured I'd be at least semi-professional and get fully clothed, just for you guys. Yeah, the coronavirus quarantine continues to drive me up the wall. I am so bored out of my mind right now. But you shouldn't start worrying about me until I start acting like Buffalo Bill. Actually, it's gotten to a point where I'm kind of jealous of Buffalo Bill, because that dude at least had someone to talk to. Jesus Christ. But anyway, hope you all are doing well. We're all making do with what we can in the midst of a pandemic, and hopefully, God Almighty, hopefully we can get back to some normalcy. So at least by the summer, it would be nice. Pools open up, and it'd be nice. That would be an awesome thing to be like, okay, you've been inside for 2 months, 3 months, or whatever. Go to the pool. Go have fun. And, but again, everything's, we're just kind of biding our time and waiting for any kind of updates or timetable or something. So until then, the world is a complete mess of a place, and we're just trying to make do with what we have. But anyways, before I get into this week's Dark Side of the Ring review, a couple of videos that I'm going to be working on that you'll start seeing soon, both wrestling related and non-wrestling related, starting with the wrestling related one. I won't give away what it is yet, but yesterday I became inspired to make a video which I think has an interesting topic and I think it's worth talking about. And it is WCW related, I will say that. I won't go into any details beyond that, but the idea for the discussion kind of got sparked in my mind. I thought it would be an interesting one to bring up. So that should be fun, and you'll probably be seeing that one next week. And I thought about doing a video on Nia Jax, but then I realized everybody's making a video about Nia Jax, and I feel like I'm both late to the party on that one, and also I feel like if I made it, it would just be stupid clickbait at this point. So, and I'm not really that interested in the topic. I think Nia is a wildly unsafe worker, and I think that's pretty much been well documented at this point. And unfortunately, we're all just kind of waiting for her to really, really, really hurt somebody. And we're waiting for that, and then to see it's like, all right, WWE, what are you going to do now? Now that she's actually really hurt somebody. But all I'll say about Nia Jax beyond that is most of the other women workers in the WWE are, by all indications, very safe. Haven't heard too many complaints about anybody else. It's just Nia, so I guess you could say that Nia Jax is not like most girls. Pause for laughter, and now I move on. Okay, so bad jokes aside, other videos I'm working on the non-wrestling related side of things. My top 20 episodes of Thundercats, which I thought was going to take me forever to edit. I wanted to get it done by the week after the first weekend of May. And this past weekend, I got a huge chunk of it done to where it's like, ooh, I might get it out earlier than expected, so we'll see. But one of the entries I still need to edit into the video is a 5-part miniseries. So that one, I've been deliberately avoiding that one because it's like, oh god, that one's going to be a pain in the ass to edit. But like I said before, it's going to be formatted very similarly to my He-Man video from about a year and a half ago, I think it was. But yeah, it's just going to be me talking about my top 20 favorite episodes from the original Thundercats series. And if you're interested in that, it should be a lot of fun. I've actually had a lot of fun going back and rewatching some of these old episodes of Thundercats. Being in quarantine, it's like, dude, I'm just looking for anything I can watch. I watched Thundercats, I watched WCW Nitro, which has been a godsend. In this era of empty arena shows, watching WCW Nitro is just amazing. And there's stuff I forgot, there's great moments that I'm reliving that are bringing back great memories. And I'll talk about more when I do more Nitro retrospectives. Those are definitely coming. But it's been a pure delight, especially working my way through like the NWO stuff from 96 to 97. It has been a wonderful experience reliving all of that. So I really had a ball with that. I've also rewatched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Realized I hate Xander. At least in the early, he's not so bad, and like once you get to season 3 and 4, he's okay. But I'm like, wow, those early seasons, I kind of hate him. Like a lot. And I've also been watching all the DC animated movies, because there's a lot of them. I'd only seen like a few of them, but now that I've got nowhere else to go, I can finally sit down and watch a good chunk of them, and most of them are really good. I really liked the Wonder Woman one, which I had seen before, like a decade ago, but I thought that was pretty good. Um, I actually today I just rewatched the Dark Knight Returns, both parts 1 and 2, and that's very very good as a straight adaptation. So I've been keeping busy watching a bunch of random nonsense, and actually later tonight we've got the NFL draft, and Legendary Pictures is doing a watch along. They've been doing watch alongs for all the MonsterVerse films the past couple weeks. They started with Godzilla, then they did Kong Skull Island last week, and then now they're doing King of the Monsters tonight with Michael Dougherty. And they got the directors involved and everything. It's like, look, dude, it's something entertaining to keep me distracted in the midst of all this craziness. So yeah, completely got sidetracked there. But anyway, the Thundercats video is coming out soon. So if you're a fan of the original Thundercats series, that should be enjoyable enough for you guys. And even if you've never watched the show, the video could probably be used as a way to kind of like give you an idea of what the show was all about and what were the highest points of the show. So I'm going to be happy to get that out to you. And it looks like, barring no issues, I should be able to get it out sooner than expected. So we'll see. And like I said, Nitro Retrospectives, those are going to start up again in May. I'll get part 2 of that coming sometime in May. And there's another Star Wars review in the works that I'm doing. Because again, in quarantine, it's given me time to read a little bit more, and that's also given me some time to reread and read some new Star Wars material. I gave up doing the Star Wars reviews because I pretty much I blasted through all the material I had in queue, and now it's just a matter of like finding new stuff. And I said there were still a couple more things I wanted to cover that I just didn't get a chance to. Well, I had a chance to at least knock out this one that I wanted to do a review of. This was one that I wanted to do from the very beginning of doing the Star Wars reviews, and I just never got around to it. And but that's going to change, so you'll be seeing that review sometime in May. It would be nice to get that up on May 4th. I think that would be nice. Get it up on Star Wars Day, so that would be cool. And I'm unlike the last few reviews I did, like the one I did in December where Rise of Skywalker basically crushed me, and all the books I decided to cram into that one, none of them were that exciting, and I'm like, oh man, what? I'm going out on a downer here. This one I'm legitimately excited to talk about, so I think it should be a lot more fun and a better review for me, and hopefully it won't be the last one because there's a few other things I want to cover as well. But I would love to get. Okay, mild spoiler. The next review is not the Young Jedi Knight series. That is one that I want to do, but that one's a lot longer because it's 14 books. So, but I haven't gotten around to that one yet. Eventually, I would like to do the Young Jedi Knight series, but this next review is not going to be that. But it is one that I am somewhat nostalgic for. So that should be delightful. But anyway. All of that is out of the way. Now let's talk about this week's Dark Side of the Ring, which covered the mysterious murder of Dino Bravo. And this is another one very much like last week's episode about Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino and her mysterious death. This one kind of fits more into the realm of like that true crime documentary, unsolved mysteries style of format and style of story and presentation. And I guess I'll start by talking about my experiences with Dino Bravo and what I thought of him just purely as a fan. And much like what I said about Jimmy Snuka last week, Dino Bravo, by all indications, Dino Bravo's best years were a little before my time. I knew and I figured that he must have been a star in Montreal, and that's where Vince got him. I had no idea that he was the booker of his own, I guess you would say, territory. His own promotion. I had no idea that was the case. I didn't know that he was like a big superhuman Hulk Hogan style, for lack of a better comparison, Hulk Hogan style star of his territory. I had no idea of any of that. So to relive that, or not relive it in my case, but to see that footage for the first time, that was like, wow, that was really interesting, because the only Dino Bravo that I knew was the one from the WWF. And I'll be perfectly honest here, as a kid, Dino was not one of my favorites. I never latched on to him. And, you have the big stars like the Hogans and the Savages and the Pipers and the Warriors and Jake Roberts, Rick Rude, those guys, those larger-than-life characters that really stand out. But even back then, there were some guys that were a little lower on the card, not as well remembered, but I had a huge soft spot for them. Perfect example would be Haku. I loved Haku as a kid. No one else loved Haku. I loved him. Hercules was one that I was a big fan of as a kid. For no other reason than his name was Hercules. I'm like, well, love that guy. And that was my only reason. I loved him because his name was Hercules. And there were a few guys like that. I was a big fan of the Killer Bees, and hardly anybody remembers the Killer Bees from that era. But I just thought, oh, look at that, they're dressed like bees. They're kind of neat. Which is odd because I was a He-Man and the Masters of the Universe fan, and I hated Buzz Off, who was the bee guy. So I was very selective in my like of bee people. But in wrestling, it was okay. He-Man bee people are stupid, and wrestling bee people are okay. But Dino was not one of those guys. I always found him to be kind of boring. And, strong as an ox. I mean, he was a physical specimen. I mean, I distinctly remember seeing the weightlifting set where he went for the world record with Jesse Ventura as a spotter. Hacksaw said in a shoot interview once that was a legitimate try for the world record, and he couldn't quite do it. But still, it was like, I think it was like 715 pounds or something ridiculous, and Jesse had to spot him to get it up, but still, it's like, Jesus, I wouldn't even dare to attempt something like that. So freakishly strong, decent look. It's funny, the documentary actually, I didn't know this about him either. I didn't know that his natural hair color wasn't blonde. I'm like, so I found it really funny when the WWE had him dye his hair, and the boys were making fun of him for it, and I'm like, I thought he looked pretty good with the blonde hair. I thought he rocked it. It never dawned on me that it wasn't his real hair color, and he actually looked, he rocked it. He looked okay with it. It wasn't as bad as like putting Dusty Rhodes in polka dots or anything like that. It was like, no, actually, he doesn't look too bad with blonde hair, but he kind of looks more like a He-Man action figure that way. But Dino was just never somebody that I latched onto. I just couldn't get into the guy, and the documentary kind of made it sound like he was just like a low-level jobber type, and it's like, all right, that was probably true in 91 when he was getting ready to leave, but there was a period when he won a lot of matches. There was a point, like 88, 89 or so, where they could have put the IC title on him, and it wouldn't have been completely ridiculous. Based on the number of wins that he'd gotten on TV and like his status on the card, like they could have put the IC title on him, and it wouldn't have been like a completely ridiculous thing to do. So it's not like he was a total jobber the entire time he was there. He also had the tag team run with Greg Valentine as the new Dream Team after Brutus Beefcake had turned face. I think the inferior version of the team. I thought, as far as like weirdo like tag teams, the Dream Team was actually pretty solid. Beefcake and Valentine, they did have some really good matches with the Bulldogs, and for whatever reason, on paper it shouldn't work, but they actually worked. And something about Greg and Dino never quite clicked with me. And the thing I remember Dino most for was being Earthquake's sidekick during the feud with Hogan, and kind of Earthquake's tag team partner in the matches with Tugboat and Hogan against Earthquake and Dino. And that was pretty much it. He just never left much of an impression on me. He had one of the worst finishers. He had the sidewalk slam as a finish. They called it... Gorilla Monsoon would call it the side suplex, but it was really just a sidewalk slam. And if you've ever seen Kevin Nash or some giant do it, it looks like he's driving the guy through the mat. But when you watch Dino do it, it looks like the softest, safest thing on the planet. And the fact that he was beating people with it just drove me insane. It's like, that looks terrible. I cannot believe that... but he won a lot of matches with that thing, so it was that kind of frustrated me even more. So as a fan, I can't sit here and say that Dino Bravo was somebody that I latched onto and that I was a huge supporter of. But again, because his best years were in the WWE or some other like more well-known territory like Jim Crockett, I didn't have access to a lot of that material even later on. That's where Snuka benefited, where even though I missed his best years, WWF made that stuff widely available, so I was able to go back and watch a lot of it and appreciate Snuka fully as a performer. Dino never got that opportunity with me because I don't think WWE owns that footage. So to see that stuff was really refreshing, and actually to compare it to someone, it's like in the New Jack episode when they showed us Smoky Mountain stuff. And, for years I'd said, oh, New Jack's just a shitty hardcore guy, he sucks, whatever. The only thing he has going for him is the theme song playing throughout the entire match. Natural Born Killers playing throughout the entire match. That's all he has going for him. And a couple of crazy stunts. where he could get hurt. That's all New Jack has going for him. And then I watch his Smoky Mountain and stuff. Okay, that guy's awesome. I would love it to have that character on a mainstream wrestling product today, as long as he's not as crazy as the real New Jack. So, it's nice to get, like, a full appreciation of a talent's body of work. And that's happened with a few guys. I mean, people for years said that the Bushwhackers were just a shitty comedy act. And I'll be honest, the Bushwhackers were never my favorites, but I always point out, it's like, yeah, but what about the Sheepherders? Sheepherders were awesome. They were like bloodthirsty monsters. Everywhere else they went, it was just WWE, where they were the Bushwhackers, and that's all anybody remembers them for, which is weird, unless you're a wrestling dork like I am, and other people that have dove in and looked at a bunch of this stuff. Hacksaw Jim Duggan is another one. Everybody remembers him as a goofball from WWF and WCW, but you watch his NWA stuff, it's like, oh my god, this guy's a vicious brawler. I'm like, yeah, right? Hacksaw's pretty cool now, right? But it's just one of those things. So I was very happy to see that portion of Dino Bravo's career and get somewhat of an appreciation for it. And it kind of forced me to kind of like reevaluate him a little bit as a fan. It's like, oh, I would actually like to see some of that stuff, to see what it was like with him as a big star in Montreal, and see how well that worked. Like a Canadian Hulk Hogan, maybe. It would be interesting to actually watch a lot of that. One area where the documentary kind of fell short was in going over his WWE run. I already talked about how they made it sound like he was basically a jobber, which is not completely true. He didn't really start losing a bunch of matches until like 91, when he was closed out the door anyway. They also completely skipped over Frenchie Martin, who was his first manager, and they just went straight to Jimmy Hart. I'm like, okay, yes, Jimmy is the better manager, but it would have been nice to get like an explanation of Frenchie Martin and how that partnership came to be, and what that duo was able to do while they were there, and what the thought process was of putting them together and everything. Frenchie Martin, he just recently passed away, I think a few years ago, so it would have been interesting to get like a little tribute to him, or something like that. But of course Jimmy's on there. It was great to see Jimmy, because Jimmy is just I mean, his character in wrestling is not an act. He really is that guy to some degree. He's just a master promoter and everything, and Jimmy's just a walking cartoon, and I love him. But we also got Jacques Rougeau on there, which was very interesting. They used an old shoot interview from Rick Martel. Rick Martel declined to be a part of it. It would have been nice to get updated verbiage from Rick Martel to see how he's doing these days. But it was cool to see Jacques. Jacques seems like a really cool, down-to-earth, funny guy. And whenever I see him in interviews, it's kind of a delight to see him. And this was no exception. He was probably the most of the wrestling people that they interviewed for this thing. He was probably the most likable person on the whole thing. And so all of that was nice. But yeah, I already talked about how they painted Dino like he was a jobber in the WWF, which wasn't true. Not completely true, anyway. And so they kind of skimmed over that portion. They completely skipped over Frenchie Martin. But the other thing they did, and it's a minor thing, but something that could have been fixed with a little bit of like editing and proofreading, I guess you would say. They made it look like WrestleMania 8 was his last WrestleMania, and they even used a clip showing this is his last WrestleMania in 1992. And I'm like, okay, WrestleMania 7 was my favorite Mania as a kid, so I know that one pretty well. That clip is from WrestleMania 7, and I know that because I know that was Dino's last Mania, because he worked with Texas Tornado on that card, and I know that because WrestleMania 7 was my favorite WrestleMania when I was a kid, so I knew that one pretty well. But they showed the clip from WrestleMania 7, but they labeled it as being from WrestleMania 8 in 1992, and I'm like, that's something that you gotta work on your... that's something that could have been fixed with proofreading, I think. And I guess only wrestling dorks are going to catch that, like me, because, again, I know WrestleMania 7 like the back of my hand, but it was also, you know, if you're trying to promote yourself as kind of like an authoritative series about wrestling, you got to get, like, simple stuff like that right. And so I'm going to nitpick it for that. However, all the nitpicks aside, I really enjoyed the look at Dino's early career, so that was cool to see. It was also nice to see Dino's family life and what his family was like, and it looked like, you know, Dino left behind a lovely family, a loving wife, and 2 great kids, and so that only made it the more tragic when he ultimately fell in with the wrong crowd, and one mishap led to another with organized crime, and that was the end of Dino Bravo. So it's one of those weird, like, unsolved cases where we pretty much know what happened, but we don't know who pulled the trigger. Like, we have an idea. We know why it happened. We pretty much know why it happened. We pretty much know the circumstances surrounding it. We just don't know who exactly pulled the trigger. And that's something that sounds like it'll never be found out, to be perfectly honest at this point. And it's one of the weirdest wrestler deaths of all time, because I remember reading about Dino's death initially. And again, very much like Snuka, it was kind of like shrouded in mystery. I'm sure if you lived in Montreal, it was all over the place. But if you lived in the States like I did, it wasn't something that was talked about that much. And it was something that all I knew is that he was shot. And I didn't know a lot of the circumstances surrounding it. I didn't even know if it was a murder or a suicide. These were things that were kind of like, it's just a bunch of facts being thrown at you, and you're just trying to, like, I was just trying to work myself through the forest to find out what the truth actually was. So again, it was very nice to kind of get the full detail, full scope of what happened, as much as possible given the facts that are available to us, and get the full scope of the impact of what happened and the family that he left behind and everything. And there were times where they were interviewing his daughter, and I got a little misty-eyed, because it's clear that it's something that still, like, hurts to talk about. I mean, could you imagine, like, going out one night and then coming home and finding your dad, like, shot to death right there at home? I mean, that's got to be traumatizing. It's something that you can't just get over. And going back and reliving that pain, I'm sure, is not fun for the family. And it was nice to see. I guess not nice isn't the word I want to use, but it was. It made the tragedy seem more real to see the family that was impacted by it. It's not just another guy that got shot, and you get to see, and that's the thing I think a lot of people don't always understand whenever something like this happens. It's like, it's not just the victim, and even though it's very sad and tragic, there's also people that get left behind as well, and that always compounds the tragedy whenever something like this happens. And again, it just sounds like, by all indications, it sounds like Dino was a perfectly nice guy. Maybe a little hot-headed. He sounds like one of those tough guys you don't want to mess with at a bar, which that's another way. Okay, we've heard all the Haku stories. Can we get some more Dino Bravo bar fight stories? I'm down for that. And, but by all indications, sounds like a perfectly nice guy that got roped into the wrong crowd. And the real tragedy of it all is that, especially back then, there was no exit plan for wrestling. You just kind of work until you retire, and then that's it. And that's the way it was back then. Again, I think it's better now, much better now, because I think the guys getting into the business are a lot smarter than the guys, back then. And they know to avoid the vices, and they know financial planning is something they're probably a little bit better at than the guys of the past. But the perfect example of a guy who got out of wrestling and then didn't know what to do with himself afterwards. So one of those cautionary tales attached to the business, and that's another thing that kind of compounds the whole tragedy of the thing, is that it wouldn't have happened if he'd had something else to fall back on, something legitimate to fall back on outside of wrestling once he was retired. Or, if he just, he probably could have taken a job within the WWE behind the scenes. Actually, if Dino Bravo were working today and he left the WWE, he'd have no trouble getting, like, a behind-the-scenes job, or even with another company, he'd get, like, some kind of other job. It's just, at that point, there weren't a whole lot of options for guys like him. So it's one of those sad truths that, unfortunately, was commonplace back in those days. And hopefully the guys and gals today that are, big stars today, they know, they plan out their futures a little bit better, and they take care of themselves a little bit better. So, another successful episode of Dark Side of the Ring. I think it covered all the right things that you needed. Probably had more mistakes in it than any of the Season 2 episodes I've seen so far, like the ones I mentioned, specifically surrounding his WWF run. That was the one where they seemed to mess up the most or omit the most. But again, I guess his wrestling career wasn't the important part of the story. It was more about the circumstances surrounding the murder and what exactly happened. So I guess any nitpicks about his the coverage of his career, probably not that important because that's not really the story that was being told for this. So, yeah, I found it to be very interesting, and in a weird way, it kind of gave me a new appreciation of Dino Bravo as a talent. I'd like to see some of that footage of him as a big star in Montreal to get the full scope of who he really was and as a performer, and hopefully appreciate him more as a fan. So, I think that's it for this episode. Next week's episode, I think, is going to be a hoot because we will be covering David Schultz. And that guy, if you don't know who David Schultz is, he's basically Stone Cold Steve Austin if Stone Cold Steve Austin was a real person. Like, I remember the first time I saw footage of him slapping the reporter, which I'm sure is going to be the biggest part of the documentary next week. And I'm looking at it, and I was looking at it, and I was like, he's just like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, but like a real person. Like, this isn't a bit. Like, he really is like that person. So, I think he's going to be a very interesting subject to cover. Specific, and not just because of the slapping incident. David Schultz is I mean, you know, to paint the picture, he did work quite a bit with Hulk Hogan during Hogan's initial run, his first title reign, and it's like, if you want to know what the Austin-Hogan matches probably would have looked like, those matches are a decent indicator, like give you like a small taste of what the Hogan-Austin matches would have looked like, because David Schultz very much was that I don't give a fuck redneck type of guy, and this was over a decade before anybody even knew who Stone Cold Steve Austin was, so I think he's going to be a very interesting subject, and I'm really looking forward to that episode. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So, until then, I will cover that episode next week, and I continue to enjoy Dark Side of the Ring. It's one of the major pleasures I've gotten out of being quarantined, is that I get to watch it the night of. You know, it doesn't matter if I stay up late or anything, because it's like, fuck it, I'm not going anywhere. And it's been delightful, so thank you to Vice for providing us with this series. And we got a few more gems before Season 2 is wrapped up. So, but I will have other videos for you next week. Again, my WCW video will be out probably Monday or Tuesday next week, so be on the lookout for that. But that is all I have for you right now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.